The band Love are perhaps rock's ultimate could-have-been story. Emerging in the mid-60s to critical, just not commercial acclaim, after several lineup changes, the band petered out by the mid-70s, and after a number of turbulent years, particularly with the band leader Arthur Lee spending time in prison, there was a redemption story of sorts where the band got back together and had a successful reunion to celebrate the 35th anniversary of Forever Changes, before Arthur Lee's passing in 2006. Today, we'll be looking at all things Love, particularly Forever Changes, but also some of the deeper cuts from their back catalogue. Good afternoon to you, Al. I think we're going to also look at their legacy, which is going to be a very interesting discussion. But why don't we take us through initially Forever Changes and just your initial thoughts and I guess what it means as an album.
Yeah, good afternoon, mate, and thank you. And I'm very much looking forward to a robust and open dialogue about this album. Mate, I've got this both on CD, purchased for $9.95 back in the day, as well as an updated vinyl. Mate, it is one of my favourite albums of all time, and I will give you the credit, mate. You got me onto this, and 20 odd years later, I'm still giving it a listen at least 2 or 3 times a year. It is just one of the most enjoyable rock experiences of all time, as quoted on the front of the CD from Mojo magazine, one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Now, if you're into that kind of end of 60s kind of sound, the Hendrix, the Woodstock kind of movement, this is a band that kind of slipped under the radar. And even though they're well known to a lot of music fans out there, the general average kind of fan out there might not have ever heard of this band. So if you are watching from the comfort of your own home, this could be a band that absolutely changes your life. Because I can tell you, mate, 20 odd years ago, when you gave this a listen after a few glasses of dry red wine, I haven't looked back, mate. It's a thoroughly enjoyable album from the very first song, Alone Again, or when it kicks off into that trumpet solo with that Latin kind of sound, through to right towards the end there, peppered with songs like Old Man that take it to this quiet kind of really majestic imagery of an old man talking about his life and giving on advice. Mate, it's just one of my favourite albums, and I'm hoping for new listeners out there, they get a real kick out of this too, mate. What about yourself? What about some songs that kind of led up to this album and after the album that could have been on this particular album, Forever Changes? Do you want to have a bit of a chat about that?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting. So, I mean, Forever Changes, I think, is definitely the go-to album for most Love fans. But I sort of see that a lot of fans may not actually have looked too far wider than that particular album in terms of their back catalogue. There's 2 parts to Love's career that are probably worth mentioning. So the first part is up to Forever Changes, where you had the likes of Brian McLean and had the original lineup, and then you had, after 1968, after the band dismantled, Arthur Lee got I guess a second version and a third version, in fact, of the band together. So it was effectively, in some ways, an Arthur Lee solo project after 1968. The pre-Forever Changes period is very interesting. It is not too dissimilar to what you hear from these early Rolling Stones or Kinks albums, and also other bands, even sort of some of the bootlegs you hear from Pink Floyd are very similar to what you hear from it. But there is a little bit of the DNA that does flow into Forever Changes, particularly Signed DC. It is really a choice cut. It's off the original album, their first album, their self-titled album. Signed DC has a lot of these sort of dark lyrical themes in it, and wouldn't be it would certainly fit onto the Forever Changes album with some of the tracks on that. Post Forever Changes, it gets a little bit interesting. There is a wide variety of stuff he ended up doing, particularly on For Sale, and I think that For Sale, if Forever Changes are under the radar, For Sale is absolutely under the radar. It is a really, really top album. The first track off the album, August, is an acid psychedelic freakout, so something that isn't particularly seen so much with the sort of the folkiness of Forever Changes. But then you have tracks like Always See Your Face and Singing Cowboy, which are are really top notch. You could certainly see them on Forever Changes, but it had a little bit of a harder edge to it. And then even beyond that, the Everlasting First, which was off the album False Start, that particular song has a Jimi Hendrix solo. So you talk about the Jimi Hendrix influence there. Well, they were actually quite good friends at the time. So Jimi Hendrix did come on to play that album. But I think that probably by 1967, Arthur Lee had quite a bit of an ambition to get to world domination stage. His peers at the time were probably in a similar place to him, like the likes of David Bowie, Elton John, probably Lou Reed off the Velvet Underground. All of those particular guys were in a similar place by that time. They went on to really just dominate music in the 70s. It didn't quite work out for Lee, and I think that was really as a result of maybe the way he ended up getting managed. But that's probably a good segue just around Love's legacy. I think that certainly there is awareness about Love and what they've been able to do. Obviously, a lot of the people in the know have seen it as being a very big influence to them. But Al, can you see them being remembered, in 20 or 30 years' time by the next generation?
Oh, absolutely, mate. I mean, it's a difficult question. I mean, who really knows? But I would say absolutely for sure that this band will be a cult band that is remembered fondly well into the future, mate. I think this band in particular that had such an opportunity to reach such heights but were held back due to different in-house things happening within the band, the amount of drugs that were being used at the time, which kind of slowed them down a bit but also kicked them back into gear once a few of these songs were re-recorded with the Wrecking Crew. I think one of the biggest challenges that the band Love had was the fact that there are so many good songs on this album, but so many songs that really weren't radio friendly, and I think that was a real challenge for them to crack the mainstream market. I mean, I listen to every single song off that and just go, it's so close to being a single, but not quite there. And I think that's part of the reason why they didn't really ever catch on in the mainstream, as well as you mentioned about the touring before. So I don't know, mate. Did you want to add a little bit more to that about 20 years' time? What do you reckon?
Oh, look, I think that sums it up really well. Like, I think I agree. It's got a lot of deep cuts. The whole album it's got album tracks, and they just, it probably doesn't have they never have a radio friendly tune just to break through, unlike other artists. I think that their music will be much more influential, as it has been and it will continue to be. For instance, I can see traces of Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age in his guitar playing compared to Arthur Lee, just with the Latino chord progression. So that's something that I found is very sort of similar-ish in listening to both of those bands and appreciating both of those bands. But I think it will be interesting with the passage of time, just given that it's not really on Broadway. They're a little bit off Broadway in terms of their appreciation. They're not a Beatles or a Rolling Stones, which will effectively be, people will love it in perpetuity. But I think that I can see just definitely the music and the influences coming through. So that's probably where I see it. It'll be a question mark as to whether people forget about it, which will be a shame, but I think sometimes that's life. I mean, we don't sit around now talking about the artists who were massive in the 1940s. We don't know. Maybe it'll be like that in 20 years' time. So that is the Indie Miners special on Love. That wraps up another episode of Indie Miners. Please look to subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitter, and let us know if there's an album you would like us to look at. So until next time, bye for now, and thank you for watching.